Hi there, Michael Mirdad here. Thanks for joining us for another one of our spiritual insights with Michael Mirdad. Someone sent in a question, and it was around the topic of indigo children. But what I'm going to do is sort of a sharing about a blend of things: inner child, indigo children, crystal children, and so on and so on. Okay? So, and it could take hours and hours to do a talk on each one of these. So this is really a bit of a summary of sorts. And let's start with this. The most important thing for me to share is that my view and, really the truth behind things like the indigo children and so on is really somewhat the same as, it sounds like a completely different topic. It's the same as topic like soulmates and twin souls. And I say that it's the same because it's very important for people to understand the word specialness. In other words, we're all the same. We're all in this together. We want to be careful that when we talk about inner child or indigo children or soulmates and so on, we don't want anybody to get tempted because we have enough ego in this world. But the point is to not so much to tempt people to think they're special. Where you watch people in the New Age community. Oh, I'm an indigo. I have a new name for my dysfunctionality. I'm joking, but it's kind of true. But it's along those lines, like specialness, my twin soul, and, I'm looking for my twin soul. We're all in this together. So shift into humility to hear this talk, and it'll really make a lot more sense. It could be offensive to people that want to make themselves better than or different than, but we're really, we are different in the illusion of planet Earth. So therefore, some of us are a little bit different frequency and vibration and so on and so on. And our inner child's developed or less developed from person to person. But I'm saying not to get caught up in that. You can go ahead and play with the terminology because you'll know the truth, but respect the illusion. Know the truth is that we're all one. Nothing needed to be special and so on. But we're all one. However, on the flip side, we're all one, but we also need to understand that in the illusion, respect the illusion, and that is in the illusion, we seem different. And so for now, we play along a little bit. With that in mind, and I hope you understand and can be patient with that part of it, but with that in mind, spiritually speaking, there's no higher understanding of anything than from a spiritual perspective, honestly. Intellect is not higher. Physicality is not higher, emotions are not higher. So it's important to take a spiritual perspective, but I'll try to cover all perspectives as best I can. So the inner child from a spiritual perspective is this. It's the soul. That after we thought we separated from God, like mommy and daddy, the child separates from mommy and daddy might have, anxiety around that, might have trauma around, birth experience, or, separation anxieties and so on. That all can happen in this world. But behind it all is that spiritually, we feel far, far more intense feelings about separating from God than we did just separating from our parents. But everything's a microcosm. You see, everything in this world reflects things that we feel on an inner world. So internally, we believe we separated from God. And then we repeat that with something called the severing of the umbilical cord. You see, so it's pretty amazing when you start to look at things from a fuller perspective. But we as souls felt lost. When we incarnate into bodies, it's just a little while before we start to feel separated from mom or dad, and then from siblings, perhaps, rivalry. In other words, everything that happens to the human body, personality when you come in, is actually just a simple mirroring of how we felt and feel spiritually. So, God has deserted us. Dad's never home. Mom didn't breastfeed me. Inner child stuff. Inner child stuff where the child growing up took on, I'm going to have to make up for my mom who's not around because she's drinking all the time, so I have to help raise my kids. Well, that's what we do with each other. What do you think we're doing watching these programs? We're helping each other out where family very likely missed the boat, and just didn't provide. Or first loves left us and that wounded us and so on. All the wounds of life, there's nothing wrong with approaching it now with spiritual teachers and healers to help us through those things, because they're really acting as spiritual surrogates for those who sort of miss the mark. And it's not to say that we should hate the people that miss the mark. They just missed the mark. That's all. That's all that happened. They just didn't get it. They weren't aware enough. They were being too selfish or whatever. That's them. What are you going to do about it today? And so a lot of people say, well, when I started working on myself, I started doing inner child work. And so they come to a guy like Michael Mirdad and say, oh, Michael, what do you think about inner child work? Or what do you think about the inner child? Or other parallels like, what do you have to say about shadow work? Well, Michael Mirdad gives you a different perspective. I'm not an enabler typically, so I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to say, look, you're asking about what the shadow is, because some people are out there. Oh, I'm doing shadow work. I'm really into my shadow. Oh, my shadow is coming forth right now, and they just personify it, and it's kind of strange. I understand it; it has its place, but it's kind of strange because if you look, my hand can cast a shadow on my shirt here. Because there's light in front of me, and when I get in the way of the light, I cast a shadow. So what is shadow work? It's when you get in the way. It's when your ego gets in the way. It's when you get so dense like a hand and you get in the way of just being the pure light that you are. So I can't just see light reflected on the world. This is the screen of the world. I can't just see the light of God reflected in the world. We just got to get in the way. So my shadow engages with other shadows, and then we're all mad because you're in the way. I want my shadow to show, not yours. Or you're blocking my light. Well, even if they move, you're blocking your light. And so it becomes a whole ego conflict on this planet. And there's things we can learn from it. But shadow work, yeah, it has its place, but don't worship it and don't personify it. The shadow is just us getting in the way. What is inner child work? The inner child is spiritually my soul that came in and became afraid, became confused, and is trying to vie for position or fight for sanity and trying to deal with all the malfunctions of earth, which is like life with if you happen to have had dysfunctional parents. So the inner child in that sense, on a humanistic level, again, the inner child is a wounded part of us. There's a wounded part of us that's embarrassed from the past. We've been shamed. We've been molested and shamed. We've been taunted. We've, even just implications of things said. Somebody could say, oh, well, my parents used to say, well, you put on a couple pounds or something, and you're just a little girl or boy, who cares? Like, big deal. And yet it can program things in us. And so when you do inner child work, it's kind of like if you've done work with, let's say you had an accident somewhere in your life and you got whiplash in the neck, then it could be 40 years later, you're getting a massage and all of a sudden either visual memories or somatic, like muscle memories and pain, emotional memory, all or any of those can come up and, bring back that experience in one form or another. Even flashbacks, like I said, or whatever. So it's kind of like that. You can have experiences that, where you have an inner child that's been shamed. 40 years later, you could be you could be speaking on behalf of at a corporation. You could be a CEO or just a person reporting, a team leader. And one person just looks at you the wrong way, and it could bring up all the shame of the child. And it's the same as any other abuse pattern of ours. It's just that we give it a name and kind of give the inner child like an embodiment of several patterns. So it's almost like it's a suitcase holding many of our varying types of patterns or wounds. And so the inner child is, yes, it has to be healed, just like shadow has to be exposed, but not overly, inflated. You can't just keep walking around, yeah, but my inner child, yeah, but my inner child. I'd like to succeed, but my inner child. I would like to have a great relationship, but my inner child. Because then you're enabling it. So that's why some people have become cynical about the inner child, because they're like, oh my God, I'm just tired of hearing it. If we would learn to present things in this world with a little more balance and not enabling and not excusing, people would be able to hear us a lot more when we share really important things like inner child work. So humanistically speaking, it's the wounds. It's parts of us that are embarrassed or ashamed. And sometimes it's people did do things, and sometimes we just felt like they did. It wasn't necessarily true, or they didn't mean to do what we thought they did. There's a story, real simple, of mine. I remember whenever this story would come up, it's kind of interesting. because in my family, whenever this story would come up, I could tell my dad, who was typically not a feeling person at all, kind of a cruel guy, I could tell he actually felt bad. He never felt bad about anything, you know. But there was this thing where he did a newspaper. He was interviewed in the newspaper for something, and they were asking him about his family and whatever. And he said, "I have a couple of sons named this and this, and a daughter named this," but he left me he left me out. And I know you're going to think I'm either laughing and it's funny, or you're going to think I'm just in denial. But it is funny because there's a lot of awkwardness around it for everybody, because he left me out. But I also think it's funny because I never really belonged to the family. But he left me out, and typically he would just get over it, the way some people talk about inner child. Get over it. But he actually knew he blew it. He tried to make excuses, and he never excused himself for anything. So I really kind of felt for him, you know, because he was like, well, they asked, you know, your son's names, and I meant to say this, but I said, you know, he was juggling and just nervously kind of, and to see him in such a vulnerable place, I really felt for him. But he thought that really must have scarred me. In other words, he thinks, well, the reason Michael doesn't feel part of this family is probably that, and he pins it on that, which is, and I never said yes or no, because I wouldn't want to tell him, you know, really, well, no, it's, how about everything in this family made me feel like I wasn't part of it. So I just let him hang on to that, if that was going to be his belief to feel better about himself or whatever it was. So I'm just saying that sometimes people don't intend to do things, and in that case, he says he didn't intend. I don't care either way. But what if I read that as a kid and went, oh my God, you know, it felt left out. And what if that became a pattern? And it did in many ways in my life, but as a kid. But what if that became a pattern? And then what if I grew up and couldn't have confidence and couldn't love myself or whatever because of it? Then really, do I want the wound to still hurt me or limit me today? Or if we wanted to personify the wound and say, Michael's inner child is carrying that wound, do I want that to you know, harm me today? So what we have to do in healing, and I'll be brief about this, whether it's inner child or shadow or whatever, what we have to do with healing is bring forward the things to heal today. Don't let them drag you backward. That's called regression or digression. So when you have an old wound get triggered, like let's say, you know, let's say a family member of mine was getting interviewed, just using one literal example, and they said, you know, yeah, I had great parents, my mom's and her name, and left me out. Whoa, that reminded me of that other incident. And then I yelled at them and hated them for it. And that's totally regression, digression. It means I'm actually being dragged back to the original pain, the original wound, the original hurt, which is not actually God's will, nor is it healthy and effective. What we really want to learn to do is see it and choose healing. Choose healing right now. See it and do whatever process you like, journaling, counseling, tracking work that I teach people, and so on, and bring the event to today, seeing it as not an incident that has destroyed you, but it's actually one pearl on a string of pearls, and it's a thread as part of a pattern of your way of thinking about yourself or being, and then choosing to take the thread string out of all those pearls and they all go falling to the floor. In other words, I'm going to heal not just that one event, I'm going to heal anything related to it. That's far more efficient a version of healing than anything else you can imagine. So that's sort of a perspective of what is the inner child. The spiritual inner child is the one that feels not just separate from parents or wounded a little here and there. It's the one that feels separate from God, from itself, from everyone. Feeling lonely way beyond what a human concept of inner child could imagine. Lonely, abandoned, rejected, betrayed, all of those patterns and feelings are there, emotions are there in the spiritual version of the inner child. But there's a bigger picture even still. You could say that that one I just described is like the soul in its wounded inner child state. But there's also a healthy, humanistic, healthy inner child, the one that likes to paint and finger color and all that, and we should allow that. But there's also a spiritual, positive, inner child, and that's the one that is the Christ child within us all. The pure spiritual God essence within us that is like a child only in the sense that we forgot it. It's sort of now sitting there in its embryonic or childlike stage, waiting to be nurtured into maturity, which is why we do the work we do spiritually. The reason we're all doing spiritual work is because we're essentially trying to birth that Christ self, the Christ child, the I am presence, and you could say the inner spiritual child. So that's what that's all about. And the last thing is that I want to say that when I said we go back and we can bring the past events up to the present for healing instead of them dragging us back, what's amazing is when you start doing really good humanistic inner child work on the wounds and so forth, as well as spiritual inner child work, what ends up happening is you'll bring the past to the present. But when you do, and to me this is a beautiful thing, when you do, what happens is you're going to actually feel blips and moments as though you're a child again. You may not notice it, you might notice it. You might not, but it's going to happen. So for example, if I was heavily wounded at 5 years old, molested or abused or neglected or whatever, and then I go through my life, I could be 55 years old, and I start doing some really deep work like I do. We do some really deep work in my annual Mastery and Healing Intensive. And so what happens is now you're going, wow, you didn't just get dragged to the past through some triggering event. Instead, it's more like, wow, I'm doing some really authentic work. Past stuff is coming up and it's being healed. And then you go, wow, cathartic or relieving or peaceful or whatever you feel afterwards, great. But that's not it. It'll continue. The healing will continue. And you're going to find, 3 weeks later out of the blue, you're changing channels, but you don't realize why, but you stopped on a cartoon because there's a child that's re-maturing inside that got left stuck in the past. They're called dismembered parts of us. Dismembered, broken off from us. And when we're doing really deep work, they start getting remembered, is the word. Remembered. To not just remember in memory, but realign, reassemble. And so we remember, and all of a sudden, it's the coolest thing because maybe you'll feel giddy, maybe you'll feel sweet and innocent, and it's just the cutest thing to know men and women of all ages can go through these and sometimes not even realize that they're happening. Now, you're not going to just reassign, realign with, or remanifest a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old. You will, but then, does it stay at 5? No. What's going to happen is there's going to be a progression. You're 55 now, you froze at 5. Part of you was left there, maybe at 8 and 2 and whatever. But when you heal, those parts get reassembled, put together, right? Remembered. And all of a sudden you feel kind of 5-ish for a minute. It's like, I've had it happen way back when all of a sudden I was like all over the Cocoa Puffs, and it's a sign of going back. You'll have these feelings of like being a kid again. Maybe your vitality level is going to be like a kid again. Excitement level, naivete in a good way. Playfulness, laughter. Maybe you'll be turned off by some of the adult things that kids think are yucky. And so maybe back off from that for a while, whether it's movies or actions or words or whatever, conversations. But you'll be 5 again. It could last a day, a week, a month. It's hard to say. It come in pieces, here and there through maybe over a year or so. Then comes the 6 and 7-year-old, and then maybe 10. Maybe you'll jump up to 12. Maybe you'll stay there a while. Then comes 15 and 16 out of the blue. Sometimes they overlap, of course, but sometimes you can tell your progression in therapy, in counseling, in healing, in reassembling by the age you go through. I only want to have one note of caution. Be careful when you go through adolescence again, because you'll likely go through adolescence. Some of us would skip it if we went through it well enough or if we're not ready to go back into that. But you very likely will go even through adolescence again. How will you know? Because you're going to start feeling edgy. You're going to start thinking about doing naughty things the way an adolescent might want to rebel. You might you might think of that as perhaps a midlife crisis kind of thing where you want to cheat a little bit on your partner, or you want to watch something that's a little edgy. You're going to try to get away with things. Maybe it'll be late to work a little more often because you're just like school, showing up late. It might be things that you did do and you're doing them again when you were an adolescent or a child or a young adult, or it might be things you never would have thought of doing. It's neither good nor bad. It's really not a big deal, and it's not worth judging yourself if you end up doing some things. Just see it for what it is. Allow it. I guess if you could say, if you're going to allow it, try to allow it in the safest way possible. Not a way that harms you or others, if possible. Okay? Keep an eye on it. Just know what it is and laugh and giggle about it a little bit. It's kind of cool, Your friends call you, "Hey man, what are you doing? You want to watch the game?" "No, I'm watching Bugs Bunny with my Cocoa Puffs." It just seems so strange to people, but I think it's the only way to fly. I typically like to just embrace that part of me anyway, because it's a good, healthy part of us. When you know what you're doing and you're not regress to being a child, kind of unconsciously. So I pray that much has made sense. It's a bit of a summary, but that's the real story about the inner child. Now, similar topic, but slightly off to another topic, the idea of indigo children. And the reason I say it's similar to inner child is because indigo child, like an inner child, is in all of us in one perspective. There's another perspective I got to share, but we all have a little bit of what they call a crystal child, a rainbow child, indigo child, and so on. It's there really in all of us. So please never buy it when somebody says, "Well, I'm a Taurus. I wish I were a different sign." We all have the signs, all the signs within us. You can access it. You just choose to, and then allow that Libran part, that Virgoan part, that Scorpion part, that Sagittarian part, whatever it is, just allow them to be nurtured. Just like you can access your own, and who would deny me this? Everyone can access their inner male or inner female, their inner child. So, it would be inappropriate, incorrect for anybody to say, no, I'm an indigo and I'm special, and nobody else is, It's just that's the insecure person wanting to be something special. They want to be unique, and that's the only way they can think of doing it. But from another perspective, the indigo child is also a valid concept. So let me explain that. Whether it's indigo child or any other version, crystal or rainbow or whatever, it's like this. The mystics of old and teachers of especially at the turn of the century, started sharing, and this also goes way, way back, that there's an idea that there are so many races, not races as in black, brown. There's only so many races, meaning cycles of human beings that come to Earth. And it's believed that there, of course, would be ultimately seven, and then the human race would be done and completely ascend. That doesn't mean 7 is around the corner, and it doesn't mean that we're only in the first. We're actually past halfway point. You think halfway, that means we got another 1,000,000 years or whatever to go. Yes and no. The movement up is much easier once you get past the midpoint, which is kind of where we are. A little past the midpoint, but we're having the toughest time. We're representing humanity waking up. So in Hindu astrology and mythology, this is true. From the Theosophical, Madame Blavatsky, Rudolf Steiner perspective, they agree. Edgar Cayce agrees. All these mystics and Rosicrucians and so on, all these mystics agree on several things in life, but this is one of the things they agree on, that there are cycles within cycles. And when it comes to the human race, we have, what we could call the Lemurian would be a race, not how many colors within Lemuria, just the Lemurian epoch or epic, but it's actually epoch. It's not like an epic moment, E-P-I-C. It's E-P-O-C-H. And in that cycle, that big cycle called Lemuria, there are subcycles within that. And once you get through 7 subcycles, then you go Lemurian to Atlantean. There are some, theorized to be before Lemurian, some, that you would be familiar with, and some not. But long story short, we have had several cycles of full races and their sub-races of 7, then shifting us into the next and shifting us into the next. Now, it doesn't end on a single day. You don't say, oh, today an entire new race is being born and the old one will just suddenly die, everybody at once. It doesn't happen that way. It overlaps by thousands and thousands of years. However, we did have the Atlantean too, and all their sub-races. They call them sub-races. But then the next was called the Aryan race. Not Aryan as in the Hitler version of the Aryan supreme white race, but rather it's just called the Aryan race. And in that Aryan race, there are again sub-races. And I'm sort of having to summarize without perfect accuracy, summarize several theories that come together because they all agree, all these different groups and systems, but they vary on at least one key point, but it's still all of it. They all still agree on what I'm saying here. But one of the key points is, which one are we now? We're now moving from the 6th race to the 7th, or is it from the 5th to the 6th? A couple of these groups differ only on that. And although that would help change when the ending comes, it's not a big deal, because what they agree on is that unending is definitely happening as we sit and speak right now. So all these ancients, from going back to tens to hundreds to thousands of years ago, have predicted these cycles and subcycles, these races and sub-races. And so what I'm leading to is the time we're in, as we just moved in to the Aquarian age, it is predicted that this is one of the sub-races that's shifting. So we're going, kind of completing one major race, going into another, finishing one sub-race as well. So it's kind of cool because it does confirm, like the Edgar Cayce perspective. He was talking about a new race of kids coming in, more sensitive and so on. But don't think that that's them and we're not that. First of all, if you're watching this program, it's likely you're part of that new race. You may not think like it or feel like it because everybody says indigo children, meaning they're 10. They're not. Anybody born really at the earliest, maybe 48 is part of that, 58 for sure, or 58 to 1960, they're part of that. But it doesn't matter. It's not like, oh, damn, I was born a day before that, so I missed out being an indigo. Not at all. You can be indigo-like and be born 100 years ago and be nothing indigo-like and be born today. So, don't get too stuck on the linear judgments and opinions of those things. The point is that anybody watching this, is part of this. And the old school, it had its place. The previous age, before the Aquarian age, the previous generations, they had their place. However, things are changing rapidly on this planet. And so as things are shifting, very much so, we're entering a new age, as we call it, and the Aquarian age. But also there is a new sub-race that's being created. And also, some would say, shifting into a full new race completely, which means one of the major ones and so on. But whether you want to think of it as a sub-race or it's a major race shift, definitely there's a new sub-race at the very least being created. And that sub-race is part of the end times for us all as we knew it. But I want to say the previous generations were a little bit harder, tougher, living and so on. The one that's coming 100 years from now, 50 years from now or whatever, is very light, very ethereal in some ways. So that's pretty sweet, right? I want to be one of those. Well, wait, you know who the real great ones are, the spiritual warriors? It's us, the ones that are half and half, the ones who have had to sort of transition from old school ways of doing things into the infinitely open new way of doing things. After that, the kids coming a generation from now, they'll have it much easier in terms of this lighter embodiment. How we get to that lighter embodiment is part of the end times, is part of the end as we know it. The earth is still going to be here, 50 years from now or whatever, because we are still going to have a place to finish our evolution, but we're going to get rid of three-dimensional dense bodies and become more ethereal. It's already happening, which is why your glands and organs can't function the way they used to. They're changing frequency. And yes, we call that illness, but is it really? if you want to think it's an illness, then just keep in mind that in our time, in our generation, pregnancy was still noted in the American medical journals as an illness. So think about that. That was considered an illness. And, so now today's glands and organs and shifts and so on, those are, they're very much related to frequency shifts. Your body isn't able to handle some of the foods it used to handle. And of course, it doesn't help that they're further toxifying some of the foods that we used to have with no problem. But as long as they don't mess up, Cocoa Puffs, then I think we're going to be all right. In any case, it's true though. You are already in the indigo frequency, whether you're somehow literally an indigo based on somebody out there's checklist. It doesn't matter because you're part of the frequency. You're here with the, assisting the shift. So we're the midwives. The people in previous generations, they were what they are. The future generations, those are the babies of the future. We're the midwives, and I think it's the most important job of all. I really do. And besides, you're going to come back again anyway. Most people are going to come back anyway, and and end up having to or getting to enjoy the perks of being one of those children. So it's kind of cool. It all works out. You can not come back if you're evolved enough, which is fine. But if you do, then just know that it's going to be pretty sweet down the road. The transition is the tough one. The birth pains, that's the tough one. That's the tough step. So whether you break this off into, and I hesitate, some people would say rainbow children and crystal children and so on. I just caution you, please be careful not to get too caught up in too many names, because pretty soon everybody's going to be so fragmented, even though they're using, seemingly wonderful little terminologies, so fragmented that nobody even knows anymore. Because at the end of the day, you have somebody that betrays you. You have somebody that speaks harmfully about you. You don't just go, well, what's great is being an indigo, I haven't even noticed this harm. When somebody hurts you, you're still tempted to be hurt. You're a human. The things you can say for sure, you have a spiritual self and an ego self. And those are the things we need to deal with. The ego can be fractured into many names like indigos and crystal children and all that. And so too can the spiritual self be mislabeled in a bunch of ways. So I would just caution you to just know the truth behind these things, Know that you're growing. Know that you're part of this new frequency that's coming. Know that doesn't mean you don't have an ego. You have an indigo ego, indigo. So we'll coin a new phrase. Indigo children. It's the indigos that still have egos that are out of control, which is most of them. So we still have that, guys. You're not born an indigo and suddenly you're just flawless and sweet. Oh, but indigos are so intuitive. Who are we talking about? What are you, like schizophrenic? Doesn't that include you and me? Aren't we part of this? Aren't we intuitive? No, indigos are extra intuitive. So they're special. So you're not. That doesn't sound healthy. I would say access your inner child, your inner indigo, your inner intuitive. Anything you want to be, call it in. Just choose to be that thing and identify with it. And if you think that a label, and I know a lot of people that talk about, my child is an indigo, so be careful. Don't look at them. Don't speak to them. You have to wait until they're standing on their head chanting or something, It's all really foolish, and it's really just enabling the ego, and that's why some people get just completely turned off and nauseated when people start talking about their special child, The truth of the matter is the child still has an ego and can still be out of control. It might be that they're unique. It might be that, because to me, unique would just simply mean unique ways to address them, but their spiritual self is the same as you and me. Their ego self has the same pitfalls as you and me. So we just want to heal the ego in all beings, indigos or not, and access the spiritual self. But if you have children that you think of as indigos and all those special terms for it, or know of people, be patient, because you're not wrong for getting sometimes a little annoyed or frustrated when people, enable the kids' behaviors. if you're doing a recital somewhere and one of these special indigos decides to suddenly start shouting and playing, army men, through all the aisles of the theater, we shouldn't go, oh, isn't that cute? No, they just need to be taken out. I don't mean taken out. I mean taken out of the theater. And, hey, if we're going in there, then we're watching this. If you can't, we're not going in there. Boundaries, man. Boundaries are good for souls, whether they're indigos or not. I don't care if they're purples or indigos or pinks. Boundaries are important because boundaries are a way of saying if we have love for self and others, then we're going to think as a we and then behave as a we, which means my behaviors will affect you and I need to be aware of that. And if they're adversely affecting you, then maybe I want to alter those out of love for the greater good. And again, that's something that some people have completely lost sight of. So that's sort of a little bit of an overview and incorporating not just the fad of indigo or indigo children, but the real message behind it, which is it's been talked about for thousands of years, that there are these cycles and cycles within cycles, races and races within races. And that we are, in fact, we are definitely in that pivotal time. From the Hindu, the Casey, the Steiner, whatever perspective, they all happen to agree. They don't all agree on everything. So when they agree, all of them, on anything, it's pretty cool to say that that's probably a pretty good standard. The fact that reincarnation or karma or the power of love or the cycles within cycles, all of these things are very valid and very valuable, at least in this dimension. So we're all heading a new direction, man, and it's cool to have it validated that there is such a thing as a new sub-race being created, and we are part of that. And as that race gets birthed and birthed more and more, it takes a couple generations for it to happen, but as that gets birthed more and more, it used to take several generations, and now things are speeding up, so it only takes a couple. But as we move into that, we're going to see the effects. But for the human soul to be in a body that can handle the new frequencies we're moving into, that body has to be altered. It's chemistry and it's neurology and so on. But for the body to be altered, the mind has to be altered. And I don't mean altered state like drugged. I mean altered as in we have to grow enough to alter and live in new body frequencies. And when for the mind, the soul to change, it means spiritual growth. And we do it the easy way or the hard way. Anytime we run into a stumbling block, anytime we run into a barrier where we will not, be able to pass through it because of ego, stubbornness, or just letting the old ways get to us, like judgment and hate and racism and so on. If that keeps up, then the universe has to say we have to speed this up a little because they're all moving to a new body, but they're not getting it. So they're not able to adapt, the law of adaptation. They're not able to adapt to new bodies. So we're going to have to teach them more intense lessons, more intensely and more immediately so that they can just snap out of the trance they're in. And so that's what we could look forward to, if you want to call it looking forward to it. So I pray that this has made sense and that it, clears things up and can help you along the way. And also that it helps you explain in your own way to other people a little bit more about this. But be patient and be careful. You can't just tell somebody who's got an out-of-control child, there's no indigo, that's just ego, That's not going to help anybody at that point. Just kind of know it and let it help shift you, and where you can plant seeds, just like I'm doing here with planting seeds about the truth of these things. You never know who you might be able to enlighten on these topics, especially people that are just open to learning. The ones that think they know and they want to absolutely believe, no, indigos are better than everyone else and I'm one of them, so I'm better than you. It's better to just not mess with that anyway. All right? So God bless you all and peace be with you. Bye-bye.